This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, Colum, there you
Good
go.
evening. Thanks, Stephen. Good evening and welcome to Trasna and Tíre. Apologies to those who have been waiting. We just had some technical difficulties, but we appreciate you staying online with us. So tonight, we're back to talk about the Republican dead. We're going to be talking about the Civil War. We talked in Lecture 149 about those who died from the 1916 to 1921 period. So tonight, we're going to discuss the Civil War, the soldiers of 22. We're going to give a general synopsis of the Republican dead of the Irish Civil War. So, just quickly, anybody who isn't mute, could you please mute your microphones, please, because you can hear us. Thank you. So we're going to, just like I said, just give a general synopsis of the Republican dead of the Irish Civil War, and we'll give you an update on how the project is going. For anybody who doesn't know what the project we are doing is, we're currently compiling the list of all casualties and deaths of the Republican movement between 1916 and 1924. At present, we have about 1,780 names, and of which we have just shy of 900 photographs for. So we've had tremendous help from relatives, historians, all across the world, and we're quite thankful to them all. We aim to get this published, with all proceeds to be given to the National Graves Association for the upkeep of graves and monuments across Ireland. We will keep you informed of when publications occur. So we're going to make a start here now. So Shane, you're okay now with moving on the slides?
Yeah.
That's grand.
Where would be? There we go. Why is it not? There we go. Right. Will I take over or?
Yeah, walk away, yeah.
All right, well, the first thing, like obviously here now we have the list of what we're going to be going through. We're going to go through the Battle of Dublin, the monthly breakdown of casualties, which actually very illuminating what comes up there. Examination of the many extra-judicial killings, which are talked about a lot, and then the month of horrors, which is March 1923, when we see the real escalation of deaths, the controversy over exactly how many Republicans were executed. We actually didn't manage to get through the ranks and all the rank statistics because there were simply so many of them that, and there were so many that are disputed in exactly who was what rank. But we did get through. We do have quite a lot of interesting statistics for you today. The first thing we have is obviously the Battle of Dublin, starting 28th of June with the bombardment of the forecourts. And our very first casualty here is Joe Considine from Clare. Joe was killed on his way back into the forecourts after the bombardment began. And we're very happy to say that only on his actual anniversary has a picture of him emerged, thanks to Dr. Thomas McConmara, the painting in the middle there. And that's something we've had a lot of trouble with. The Battle of Dublin, there's very few pictures of casualties. We have none for Monks, Doyle, or Clark. Monks was killed in the Red Cow in a confrontation with the National Army. Doyle was shot outside the Ormond Hotel. Doyle was from New Ross, so connection there to me. William Clark as well, shot dead outside the Fianna headquarters. Then we have one of the interesting ones. We have Charles Malley here. Charles was Ernie O'Malley's younger brother, and Ernie actually talks about him in The Singing Flame, about how simply he hadn't seen him in years. They'd met once or twice in the forecourt, but that was it. But Charlie himself was shot dead. I believe it was, where was it, Colum?
It was no, it was just the top of Colum Street. I think it was Talbot Street. I think he was.
And then
he was shot there. It was just, I think he was making his way over to the block, wasn't he?
That was it. Yeah, he was making his way over to the block. Then we have Tom Wall. I think that was shrapnel wounds, or maybe that was Markey. Marky is from Dundalk, and the relations were actually posting pictures from only today. It's all very nice to see that 100 years on, these people are still remembered by their families. We have Jack McGowan from Skerry's, and I skipped over the 29th and 30th. Sorry, blame Colum for how he's ordered it. But yeah, we have Frank Jackson, originally from Liverpool, John Mahoney, originally from Tipperary. Like, it's a wide range the casualties themselves actually come from a wide part of the country, because this was a consolidation of some of the anti-treaty forces. One thing that's interesting to remember as well is the fact that in the Battle of Dublin, the anti-treatyites had the numbers advantage initially. It was actually the artillery that really gave the Free State forces the advantage there. And throughout the Battle of Dublin, obviously, they became more and more surrounded. The situation got worse and worse until eventually we concluded with the surrender of the bloc and the death of Cathal Brugha. And, well, nothing much that can really say about Cathal Brugha's death that would be new. But it is interesting that he was refusing to surrender himself while ordering the rest of the Republicans to surrender. But as John Dorney, who's here, will tell you, the Dublin story doesn't end with the Battle of Dublin. The Dublin story for the Civil War continues, but it changes dramatically from this essentially 1916 type street fighting into a series of basically reprisal killings. So that was the Battle of Dublin. Anything to add there, Colin?
No, I'm okay. Well, actually, maybe it's worth noting Cathal Brugha's rank. See, he's down as volunteer. When I was looking at the nominal roles for, I believe it was the 4th Battalion, G Company 4th Battalion, he was just listed as a volunteer. He'd actually rejoined as a volunteer at the start of the fighting. So I think it was his old company actually that he was originally part with from the early days. But for a man who held the rank of Chief of Staff in 1917 and 18, here he was again, just joining as a lowly volunteer.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you want to carry on.
That's start of the month by month. So we have June, and here in June, we've got this here now is very conventional looking war fighting. You've got killed in action. You have one case of someone being accidentally shot. That will be William Spillane from Cork. Then we have here Liam Leach, whose picture from Dundalk, whose picture only emerged yesterday even, with the 29th to his death. Family put up a picture of him, which was very nice to see. And we have James Connolly. James Connolly was killed in September 1920 by the Black and Tans. But yeah, June, it's just conventional fighting. There's nothing really particularly.
Shane, your Wi-Fi is starting to act
different about it compared to other civil wars. It's when we're going to July.
Yeah, your Wi-Fi is getting a bit is acting up a bit there. Do you want to carry on, or do you want to reset it, or?
I think it'll be okay.
Yeah, okay, no worries. Right, sorry about that.
Do you want to take July or will I?
I can just quickly take July. We can see that the war had moved out of Dublin into Leinster. If you're to read Ernie O'Malley's Singing Flame, he goes into great detail about how the anti-treaty force had moved up from Tipperary to relieve the anti-treatyites in Dublin. They'd moved into Wicklow and South Kildare and eventually into Carlow before going into Wexford. And there was a battle in Enniscorthy earlier on in July as well. So we can see an increase here in accidental deaths, and we also have a suspicious extrajudicial death. We have in the pictures here, we have Captain James O'Mara, who was actually killed in just 1 second here now. I'll just get the notes. He was
landmine.
Oh, you have your notes?
Yeah, O'Mara was killed with Jerry Riggs and another volunteer in an accidental explosion of a landmine. And what was found interesting about that one is there's J on the 3rd Tipperary Brigade Memorial site, which is a fantastic website. J Riggs was just listed as a name. And we spent ages trying to figure out who this person was. And it turned out that this was actually a particularly notable incident. And it just goes to show that places like Tipperary have so many dead, names can simply become that, J Riggs, nothing more.
It turns out he was actually an officer in the Royal Flying Corps that became the Royal Air Force in 1918. He'd only briefly served in the RAF, and as you can see with Captain James O'Mara as well, I believe that's a British Army uniform he's wearing there as well. So he also had great war experience. I don't believe Riggs had great war experience, but he joined at the end of the First World War, for returning to Ireland after being demobilised, and the joined the IRA. You have Section Commander Lawrence Sweeney of the South Dublin Brigade. He was killed in action near Castledermot in County Kildare on the 5th of July, 1922. We have Sylvester Shepherd. He was from Monasterevin, County Kildare. He was actually in the Carlow Brigade. He was also killed in South Kildare on the same date, I believe. And we have Adjutant Jack O'Halloran from County Clare. He was also killed in action in July. For anyone who might be interested, the 4 suspicious extrajudicial that we have are the deaths of Patrick Connolly, a native of Belmullet, County Mayo. He was killed in Wexford Town. I believe it was an incident of looting was occurring in Wexford Town. He was also unarmed, and he was shot in very murky circumstances. We have Thomas Sheeran of Sligo, who was shot in the back of the head, I believe, at a National Army checkpoint. We have Samuel Oakes of Kilkenny, who was shot in the early hours in Blackmill Street in Kilkenny City. He was shot in the head while trying to escape, and he ended up dying in the kitchen of a place that's now a pub, I believe, in Blackmill Street in Kilkenny. And we also have Stephen Ruin from Clare Castle, County Clare, a noted trade unionist. He was actually standing at his door, and he was just shot quite randomly by the National Army as they were passing. So if you want to move on, Shane.
Yep, August is when we begin to really see the emergence of extrajudicial killings. And as for executed, that would be Dunn and O'Sullivan, who were hanged in England over the shooting of Henry Wilson. They are often kind of forgotten because the whole incident is treated as a bit of a sideshow to the Civil War, but they're buried in Dean's Grange Cemetery now. And the interesting thing about their actual
Shane, your Wi-Fi is acting up again.
Dunn was there, basically justifying all they'd done, but unstable. Come on, there we go. Anyway, from O'Donnell and Sullivan, but then you've also got but then we've got the death of Collins, and the death of Collins is when we really begin to see the emergence of extrajudicial killings. You had Harry Boland at the start of the month, which has always been very murky as to what exactly happened, partly because of his own decision not to name who'd shot him. But after Collins is shot, the Free State forces begin to really start to go in for the extrajudicial killings. So you have the deaths of Bernard Daly there. You have the Fionn, Cole and Colley, who were shot dead the same day, and this was days after Collins was shot. But you still see a large number killed in action in conventional fighting in places like Waterford, the Kilkenny or the Kerry landings. So that was that month. But then September.
Shane, I was just told here, if you turn off your video, your sound might improve.
That's a good idea, yeah. Well, do you really just not want to see me that badly? Okay. There we go. See if that helps.
Okay, now, so
Of
we have
September.
rise. Yeah, we have rise in the extrajudicial here. It actually outranks the killed in action. So you can see that the civil war was getting very intense by September. September was also the month that we have the resolution passed in the Dáil for basically to bring in the special powers that the Free State would eventually use to crush the IRA. In the Civil War, it was the Army Special Powers Resolution. It was 20th September. So it's because you can see that the rise of deaths, and there was a remarkable effect having upon the economy as well. The IRA was targeting where it was an intense. The Civil War had gone so intense that it was starting to affect the economy, and of course the deaths were causing a lot of controversy. So they brought in the Special Powers Resolution. It of course wasn't legal because for many reasons we know. Also to save embarrassment as well, because a lot of the legislation would have to been signed by the king or the king's representative in Ireland, and of course we couldn't have had that, because if a representative of King George V was to sign in a law that would see the death of Irish Republicans, it would only justify Republicans their view of the Free State being the subordinates of the crown. So September here we have there's some it's very there's a lot of murky incidents. We have a picture here of Brian McNeill. He was the son of Owen McNeill. He was killed on Ben Bulben by Free States, by the National Army. Very contentious day that was, the Noble Six of Ben Bulben. He was killed. He was actually a high-ranking officer, the division adjutant, and he was killed alongside several volunteers and from Sligo Town Company,
5.
and also Seamus Devons and TD. You have something to say, Shane?
Yeah, well, 5 volunteers, but yeah, like Seamus Evans was the TD for Sligo, and he was one of those killed. But the whole incident is very murky because there's differing accounts as to what happened. There's some that will tell you it was actually conventional fighting. There's others that will say it had been fighting, but they were machine gunned to death. It's a very unclear incident that's still well remembered today, and there's still commemorations on for it. I think.
Sean
Who else do we
McAvoy.
have here?
Sean McAvoy, he was an intelligence officer in the Dublin Brigade. He was shot dead in Dublin.
Or you'll have Michael Neville the same.
Yeah, Clareman. Yeah, he was shot in Dublin as well. Sean O'Donoghue, he was an officer of the Cork First Brigade. He was shot. He was brought out to the outskirts of Cork City and shot dead. And we have Con Hanley.
He was actually shot near the home of the Delaney brothers, who were killed in the burning of Cork, both IRA volunteers. He was killed very near their home, which was kind of an incident which Republicans would say justified the entire cause, because here we have now Republicans being shot where they'd been shot 2 years prior.
That's it, yeah. We have Con Hanley. He was of the South Tipperary Brigade. He was actually from the home district of Downbreen. He was killed in action, I believe, in mid-September 1922 as well. So you can see that the casualty numbers are starting to rise up quite heavily for September compared to the previous months.
October, we've still got plenty of killed in action. We've got, actually, overall the deaths here seem to be a bit lower. Yeah, overall October seems to be in a bit of a lull compared to other months, but we do still see plenty of deaths. One in particular here is Paddy Darmar Cara Dalton of the 3rd Tipperary Brigade, officer commanding the 4th vice commandant of the 4th Battalion. And here's Seamus Mulrennan, who was from Roscommon in one of the Mayo Brigades. He was killed in action. What happened to his brother, we're going to go into as well. His brother was a prisoner in Athlone. Sean McCowan got into a bit of a debate with Tony Lawler about his shooting. Tony Lawler decided the best way to prove he was a good shot was to shoot Mulrennan. then Mulrennan would die a few weeks later of the wounds. And this was just kind of an example of how they treated the prisoners.
We also have Jack Lawler there, who was he was arrested by Free State soldiers, or sorry, by National Army soldiers, and he was brought to a graveyard, and his body was found there the next day. They reckon that, judging by his injuries, that his hand, the bones in his hand had been crushed or smashed. So they reckon that he grabbed onto the gate of the graveyard as he was being dragged in, and that the rifle butts of the soldiers had been used to break his grip. They actually broke his the bones in his hand, but he was riddled with bullets and left in the graveyard.
Buried there also.
Yeah, he's buried there. Yeah, and we have James O'Callaghan there. He was from Newcestown in County Cork. He was killed in action, and Thomas James from Mayo. He was also killed in action as well. So we're going to go into more detail. You see a rise in the extrajudicial and suspicious deaths. We're actually going to go into a bit of detail about that now shortly, and also other things now. So if you want to go into the next month, Shane, we'll move on.
Yeah, November.
Okay. So you can see the executions had started at this stage. We had, of course, the Beggars Bush executions. We had Erskine Childers being executed. And it's we just have the extrajudicial and also on the increase as well. We have a Vice Brigadier Christopher Kit McKeown from Westmeath. He was actually shot by by National Army soldiers in Moat, County Westmeath. Section Commander John Gaffney, Volunteer Joe Spooner. They were actually on the executed list. They were one of the first of the men to be executed in the Civil War. Erskine Childers, we'll talk a bit about that now shortly. And also Commandant Philip Gilgun from the North Sligo Brigade. He was a native of Manor Hamilton, County Leitrim. He was killed in action in November also.
Yeah. Nothing that November. Then in December we begin to really see executions rise, because in November we'd obviously had 8 prior, but the first 3 were to clear the way for shooting the first 4 were to clear the way for shooting Childers, because they didn't want to be accused of singling him out. That was essentially the reason why they picked out 4 volunteers who'd basically just been caught carrying arms and shot them, because that was also their pretext for shooting Childers. If you had picked him out immediately as the target, it would have caused a huge amount of PR issues. But in December, they really get into the executions policy, most famously the 4 martyrs of December 8th. But even in there, there's still men being killed in action. Seamus O'Toole there is an interesting one. He was OC of one of the Carlow battalions from Restangel and Wicklow. He and Miley Carroll were shot near Sheen and Carlow. But Seamus is kind of a hard one to categorize him, because he was shot, he was brought to the Kerry prison hospital where he died, but it's also alleged by relatives that when they got him back, he was riddled with other wounds that he wouldn't have got in action. And he was given a hero's funeral, buried and all that. But after that, very little mention historical record. There's no folk memory outside of the immediate area of Wicklow he was from. And then we have the 4 martyrs, McKelvey, Mellows, Barrett and O'Connor, and they were executed essentially as a reprisal, no, not essentially, but quite literally as a reprisal killing for the shooting of Sean Hales and O'Malley the previous day. But the interesting thing here is there's no legal basis for shooting them, because the pretext for shooting any of them was obviously very flimsy in the September motion on the public safety resolution was already very flimsy for many reasons, but these 4 had been picked up before that was even implemented. And there's no minutes of the cabinet meeting where it was decided. There's no records of how the decision was made. We have recollections of Kevin O'Higgins being against it, that sort of thing, but beyond that, we don't really know what happened.
We have Thomas Bean there as well. Another murky episode regarding Thomas Bean. That was when they were picked up, him and his comrades of at Moore's farmhouse near Leixlip. The official narrative was that he attempted to escape whilst in the glass house in the Cogadh camp, and that he was shot while trying to escape. But eyewitness accounts, particularly Brian Moore's sister Annie Moore, I believe it was, she stated that he was actually savagely beaten by the National Army as they were arresting him, as they tried to get him onto a lorry, and that he died. He died there, or he died of his wounds afterwards. But it's still a very murky killing. And same with William Harrington there from Tralee. He was shot quite publicly at a Christmas bazaar in Tralee. He was the National Army had surrounded the building, I believe, or entered the building quite hostile, and Harrington approached him and he was shot in the head in public. So you can see that the National Army were quite ruthless, and also that they were quite careless, that they didn't care of who they shot in public. So you can see that it's getting very intense at this stage for the Republicans. But with the 13 executed in December, you can see that the executions were going to have a profound effect on the Republican morale as we entered 1923. Shall we move on, Shane?
Yep, January. Oh, January. I mean, I don't think anything we could say would really say as much as that black bar there.
So we have 34 deaths by execution, compared to 7 killed in action, 5 extrajudicial suspicious, and 3 prison deaths. So it completely outweighs the whole lot of any other deaths relating to the conflict. Thomas McKeown from County Louth, thanks to the family members for sending us his photograph. We've only ever had a very scratchy photograph of him beforehand. Frederick Burke from Tipperary, he was executed in Roscrea. James Lillis, the only member of the Carlow Brigade to be officially executed. He was a native of Bagnallstown or Minnabeog, County Carlow, and he was caught in arms and he was executed in Carlow Barracks. That picture was given to us by Angus O'Snoddy TD. We have Patrick Hennessy from County Clare, who was one of the Limerick executions. He was executed in Limerick, I should say. It's just an intense period. At that time, there was the Army Command were encouraging all the local National Army commanders in the districts in the divisional areas to set an example and execute prisoners who were found with arms, and some no problem, others no. You can see that Kerry, the Free State commander in Kerry, Murphy, he was actually dead against executions, but he was also relieved of his command shortly after. As you can see now, the next few months in Kerry, and what we have is it's just an encouragement. You see, Dublin was getting the bad name for having all the executions up until then, but since you can see that they were spreading out, so we had a range of executions in Louth. Actually, we had 2 sets of executions in Louth, in Dundalk. We had executions in Tipperary. We had executions in January. We had 2 executions. 2 men were executed in Waterford. We had
the example in Waterford of any kind of execution or extrajudicial killing. Really, Waterford has been very clean fighting overall compared to other counties.
It's you can see that the executions spread out well across the country. It's particularly in areas that were the anti-treaty were still quite hostile, and it was clearly a message to quit the fighting. Or simply having a gun in your possession is going to lead you to be executed. So yeah, it dies down a bit. Come February, you'll see in February we only have 1 execution, so it's a dramatic turnabout there. that the National Army command were giving basically a chance for the anti-treatyites to just cease hostilities, and we only have one execution in February. If you want to move on the slide, Shane, please. It's Thomas Gibson. He was executed in Maryborough Jail, now Portlaoise, and he was actually a National Army. There's a picture of him there when he was formerly in the British Army, but he'd originally been in the National Army, and he absconded and rejoined the IRA, and he was found, and he was actually tried for absconding from the National Army and also bringing weapons with him. He actually took a good few rifles and grenades with him, I believe. So he was the only execution. It's actually, his execution was witnessed by the longest living veteran of this period, and that was from Kerry. Oh my God, his name's after leaving. Daniel Keating. Dan
Keating, yeah.
Yeah, he actually witnessed the execution of Thomas Gibson in Portlaoise. You can see that there's a rise in killing in action, even though I know that, as I just mentioned, there was a relief given towards the executions to stop, to encourage the anti-treatyites to stop the fighting. We have Thomas Goff of Sligo. Thomas, this picture was only given to us here last month by a relative. Thomas was actually taken prisoner. He was also a former RAF pilot as well. And he, whilst been taken prisoner, they were being marched, I think it was in Belcher, County Sligo. They were being marched down the road, and for whatever reason, or whatever he felt he had a chance, he decided to go and make a run for it across the fields. And the newspaper accounts at the time give a bit of detail about Goff's escape and how he says, "Cheerio, boys, I'm out of here." And he made a leap for the ditch, and he was shot down in the field. We have, of course, Brigadier Dinny Lacey of the South Tipperary Brigade. He's very popular image of Dinny Lacey. A lot of us, anybody who would have a knowledge of the period would have seen an image of Dinny Lacey somewhere along the line, and his story. He was actually shot in a roundup around the Glen of Aherlow by National Army. He was also killed with Paddy McDonough, and also a boy of 10 years of age, Edmund Quirk, I believe his name was, 10 or 12, maybe younger possibly. But he, interestingly, the young boy, Edmund Quirk, his father actually applied for a military pension for the young boy, stating that he'd been a lookout for the IRA. Now, quite possibly he was a lookout, but he wasn't, we believe, an official member of any of the organisations, with a Fianna Éireann or Irish Volunteers. He wouldn't have been a member of the Irish Volunteers, of course, but he would have been, he probably helped them out for a couple of days, keeping an eye out for, but he was killed in action anyway, and the father got, his application was unsuccessful in the end.
Yeah. As well as that, the house where they were shot dead was also very close to where the Dwyer brothers were shot dead in, I think it was October 1920, both were IRA volunteers. It was a particularly brutal incident with grenades thrown at the family and that kind of thing. I think I wouldn't know the area myself, but I think it is literally 1 or 2 fields away from their home.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
But like another thing here you can see as well is in January the extrajudicial deaths dropped dramatically compared to, well, not dramatically, but they were starting to drop a bit when executions came in, and then when executions are cancelled, they start to rise up again in proportion. So like there is, the argument made for the executions policy was that essentially if you had executions, there wouldn't be unofficial reprisal killings, but the next month is going to expose the problems with that theory.
It's like January with the executions, March with the extrajudicial murders is it's quite similar. The majority being in County Kerry. We've all heard of Ballyseedy, Countess Bridge, and a scatter of killings, roadside killings across the country, particularly in Dublin and in Munster. The executed in March, we have, who do we have that much, Shane? We have
we have Parl, Crane, and Hogan. We have, which are the three Wexford lads, and this is also another case of where reprisals come into it, because Parl, Crane, and Hogan were taken into Wexford jail, executed. Then after they were executed, the IRA took out 3 National Army members and shot them dead in Adamstown. Then after that, Michael Furlong is shot dead in the general vicinity as well, near the end of the month. So like there is, I mean, you have to remember, we are telling one side of the story here, and that we're only talking about the IRA killings. There are deaths. There are obviously National Army soldiers being killed at this time as well. And one thing as well that comes into as well is, you see here March 1923, there's a single example of an accidental killing of an IRA volunteer. But if you look at the Free State side, there are probably the deadliest force against the Free State Army or the National Army was in fact itself. The sheer number of deaths caused by weapons mishaps and the like. I have the start of a theory that I only came up with today that I'm going to be exploring, and that my belief there is that so many of the Republicans would have had civil war, or would have had tan war experience and the like, and a great many of the National Army were simply brand new recruits to the whole concept of fighting. It's likely that the people on the Republican side had already gotten used to handling weapons, and those opponents simply hadn't. Colum, you
Is your
there?
sound? Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I thought your sound was gone again, Shane. Sorry. With the extrajudicial, we go into a bit more detail regarding Ballyseedy, Countess Bridge, and the massacre that happened in Carstadine as well. So we'll just talk about those. We'll give a few other examples of those who were killed in County Kerry and across the country. So if you want to move on, Shane.
Yeah. There we go. April.
Things start evening out a bit here. Now we have an increase in the executions. So again, there was a great effort by the Free State. It would have been the Free State at this stage to end this war. It was also the month of the death of Liam Lynch, Commander-in-Chief of the Republican Forces. He was succeeded by Frank Aiken. Aiken at that stage had also been, I believe Aiken had been arrested and was and that there was an overall desire to end this war, and by all sides, it was just times were getting very tough. The IRA were being pushed into dugouts. They didn't have the safe houses that they had in the War of Independence period. Everybody, a lot of people who remained neutral, they just wanted an end to this war. They wanted an end to the hostility, the killings, the executions. It was just a very demoralizing period. Every day there was reports coming in of mass arrests, dugouts being found, former comrades turning informers, and it was just really the end of the Republican movement at this stage. We have Commandant Jerry Kiley of the South Tipperary Brigade. He was killed in action, I believe, with Dan Breen witnessed his death. We have Frank Cannan from the Tuam Brigade in East Galway. He was executed in Tuam. We have Lieutenant Jim McInerney. He was from Kerry. He was one of the 3 men that were captured at Clashmill Caves in Kerry. Himself, Ned Graney, and Reginald Stenway.
Hathaway was a British soldier as well, don't forget.
That's right. We can't find a photograph of him. It's quite irritating. We can't find any information on him, bar his background details in England. Hathaway actually had a chance to leave. He'd actually signed a form stating that he was going to end his time fighting. It was only when a very close friend of his, Hanlon, I believe, was executed in Tralee a few months back in January, that he rejoined the IRA or to go back to service again. And he was actually with Jim and Ned Graney and Timothy Aero Lyons. We'll actually talk about that now shortly, about the death of aerolines. It's quite a sickening death, but it should be mentioned. So if you want to move on, Shane.
Yeah. I mean, as well, another thing to say as well is the geography plays a huge part in how we perceive things, and that we skipped over Drumbo there in March, which we really should have mentioned, because Drumbo was an example of trying to spread the policy around. Drumbo was like for
Is your sound acting up again, Shane?
years, including
Shane? Yeah.
Charlie Daly.
I think Shane's just cutting out there. Shane, if you can hear me, can you make myself or Colum full host?
I can hear you, Stephen. Yeah, I can do that. I can do that here now, yeah.
Just so the controls aren't lost.
Okay. It won't allow me to, Shane. Oh, you're down as host, Stephen.
Right there on.
Sorry about this, folks.
I'm back.
How are you, Shane? Right, you will be set you up again. You don't share your
Yep.
screen.
Okay, it should be able to do it now.
Okay, Shane, you're down as co-host.
Need to make co-host.
Yeah, you're co-host now, yeah. Your Wi-Fi sounds very echoey again. Your volume.
Now?
Yeah.
Right, there we go. And then
Right, Sean.
right, there we go. Right. What was that?
Okay, so what me, yeah.
Yeah, we're just about to move on to May. All right. Do you want to take the lead?
May, as you can see, the deaths are actually quite low. You can see that the IRA had been militarily broken at this stage. We have only 2 deaths killed in action. We have 2 of each, actually, I should say. 2 executions. We have the pictures there. We have Willie Shaughnessy and Christy Quinn. They were killed and executed in Ennis. I believe they weren't even involved in the killing of the National Army soldier. We have Commandant Sean Quinn. He was the successor to Frank Aiken of the 4th Northern Division. He was killed in action. Interestingly, he's actually the uncle or great uncle, I believe, of Rory Quinn, former TD and minister, and Fergal Quinn. Another interesting family connection we have is of one of the Cogadh executions of 1922, December 1922. James O'Connor. He was, I believe there was an article about it yesterday on the papers of this relationship. But James O'Connor was a granduncle of the president of Sinn Féin. That's right, and I believe we have a few other connections to politicians and celebrities today from this period. We have Commandant Niall O'Boyle, or he went as Niall Plunkett O'Boyle. He had been a Donegal battalion commandant during the War of Independence, and he was actually imprisoned towards the end of the War of Independence. Upon release, he remained with the anti-treaty force throughout the Civil War, and he actually was in command of a flying column base attached to the South Dublin Brigade. It operated mostly in the Dublin and North Wicklow Mountains, and at a house in Knocknadroose in Hollywood, County Wicklow. It's actually quite close to the scene from the Neil Jordan movie where Liam Neeson trained at Bale na Blah. It's actually very, very close to where Niall O'Boyle was actually was shot. But there was the National Army had surrounded the house in Knocknadroose, and quite interestingly, it's the same house where a man by the name of Oliver Hoyle was shot and killed by Michael Dwyer's rebels in 1801. But Niall O'Boyle was the house was being besieged, but he wanted to get the owners. He wanted to relieve the owners of the house. He wanted to get them out of the battle, and as he was in discussions with the National Army officer, he was shot point blank in the head. So he was one of the last major high-ranking IRA men to be killed in the dying stages of the Civil War.
And the man who killed him as well was Roger McCorley, who was former officer commanding the Belfast Brigade.
That's right. He was also a grandnephew of Roddy McCorley, who was executed in 1800. The famous ballad, Roddy McCorley. So that's another interesting connection, 1798, in that story of Niall O'Boyle.
I mean, another thing with Niall O'Boyle as well, being from Donegal, it's worth mentioning how memory and fact can become quite divorced in these cases. In that, recently I was looking into the Donegal Republican Roll of Honour, and what I found there were a few deaths where the years were wrong, that kind of thing. There was one case listed, no, not Mary McBride, Nellie, I can't quite recall the surname, Cumann anyway, from North Donegal.
Ellen
She
Kelly.
was listed Nellie Kelly, that was it. She was listed 1927. I found it was 1929. But even in 1928, there was a roll of honour read in Unphoblocked where they said Dan McConalogue died in action December 1923. And I searched and searched for this Dan. I couldn't find him anywhere. And the reason why I couldn't find him was because he didn't die in 1923. He died of a prison death. He died of the effects of imprisonment in 1925. So memory and fact can become quite divorced in these cases, and often those are the ones that really take work to find, because there often is a grain of truth to them. Another one is Edward Snoddy, all related to T.D. Angus O'Snoddy. His date of death is sometimes a few months wrong, and that makes finding them so much harder because you're looking in the papers for this person, you know they exist, but actually getting there and then can take a lot longer than you expect.
We have actually a very similar case. That's the Donegal Roll of Honour. We have a similar case with the Sligo Roll of Honour, where we have mention of Bartholomew Noon. He's listed as killed in action 1923, and God Almighty, we searched up, down, left, right, and everywhere for Batty Noon, and we couldn't find him. So turns out he actually died in June 1924, and it wasn't in action. He's somewhat related to the Civil War. He'd been badly injured in an escape attempt in 1923. He actually had one leg amputated, and he received 13 gunshot wounds from a machine gun. He went into hiding, and he ended up in Dublin in a home in Monkstown, either Monkstown or Dunleary. And
it was Monkstown, yeah.
Yeah, and they were on the way. It's quite unfortunate. They were on the way to a fundraising event, and they were in a lorry, and the lorry overturned, and the only person to sustain serious injuries was poor old Batty Noon, and he died several hours later. But he told the Mother Superior in the hospital that it was his dying wish to actually to be buried in the Republican plot in Sligo. So there was great curiosity from the Sligo Republicans about this Batty Noon, because he's buried in the Republican plot. He must have died in action. And another interesting one to remember is from Sligo is Paul Geoghegan. They couldn't find any information about Paul Geoghegan, and even we did a general search for him, we couldn't find anything about him. And I've been talking to Sean McManus from Sligo, and he indicated to me that Geoghegan was from Tipperary or Limerick or in that direction, and he was completely right. He actually was. He was actually born near near I think it was near Clonmel or Cashel. It was near Cashel actually. But his father who was a Carloman, was actually a railway porter. So the family moved about quite often, and they moved to Limerick. And his name wasn't actually Paul Geoghegan; it was Peter Paul Geoghegan. So we found Peter Paul Geoghegan, no problem. Paul Geoghegan, no. Paul was actually not a very common forename that time. Yeah, we found how he died, and that he'd been killed in action, and so that's been sorted. So it just shows that in every county role that we've had to look at, there's a lot of mistakes. Now, like I said in the previous talk, to no fault of those who compiled them, because now we're in the age of information, and like this week alone, we had the attempt to recreate the Public Record Office has been published online, and that's fantastic to see. But a lot of these rolls were compiled in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, and 50s, and so forth, and a lot of it's from memory of those who remained with this Republican tradition. And a lot of the newspapers, of course, some were died out by the 1930s and 40s, so their archives probably weren't available to the public to check out. And we can thank the Irish News Archive for having their radical papers section, because it's been tremendously helpful in our project. So yeah, if you want to carry on, Sharon, there.
Yeah. There we are, post-ceasefire.
So we're defining the post-ceasefire. It's from May 24th, the day of the ceasefire, the official ceasefire, right up to Christmas week, 1923. So as you can see, we have a lot of prison deaths. That's because there was, I believe, 15,000 people incarcerated here across the country, particularly in camps such as in the Cogadh and Newbridge and Gormanstown, and there's Kilmainham and Mountjoy. There was just prisons all across the country were jam-packed with Republican prisoners. And of course, when you have people on top of people, you're going to get diseases spreading quite rapidly. And because of these conditions as well, we also had a mass hunger strike, a general hunger strike in October 1923, which I believe it's actually a record that most people go on hunger strike at once. So I think it was 10,000 people. Many lasted 14-15 days on this strike, and it caused serious health issues for many people. And we can actually see it up into 1924, 25, and 26, a lot of people dying as a result of that hunger strike. So we have the first hunger striker to die was in late August 1923, Whitty from Wexford.
No, 2nd of August.
2nd of August, thanks, Shane. We have Dinny Barry, who was arrested he was a Corkman arrested in Wexford. He actually died as a result of hunger strike. We have Andy O'Sullivan. I believe he was a native of Cavan, but he was with the Cork 2nd Brigade. He died of hunger strike as well in November or December 1923. We also have, quite interestingly, we have there have been several previous hunger strike attempts as well throughout the Civil War. We had Joe MacDonagh TD, brother of the 1916 executed leader Thomas MacDonagh. Joe had actually gone on hunger strike briefly, but his health deteriorated, and he eventually, I believe he died in the Marshall Hospital. After an operation, his health completely deteriorated, and he died on Christmas Day 1922. So, I don't go off to go too far away here now. We have Noel Lamass. Many of us here will, of course, know the story of Noel Lamass, the brother of Taoiseach, future Taoiseach Sean Lamass. Noel had been involved in the anti-treaty forces at the start of the Civil War, and I believe he fled to England. He came back after the ceasefire. he had made it clear that he was finished with fighting, and he was abducted in broad daylight in the street in Dublin, and he was brought, as we know, he was brought to the Dublin Mountains, and he was horrifically mistreated. He was his body was found riddled with
Multiple
bullets.
bones broken, shot in the head. And then the body as well wasn't discovered for, I think it was several months, which
Yeah.
only made the scene even more grim to find.
Yeah. So there's
Yeah,
memorial to them. With Henry McEntee, he was abducted in early August 1923. So this is a good few months after the ceasefire. Republican activity had died at the stage, and still there was retributory attacks occurring. Still, we have like Henry McEntee. He was abducted and murdered, quite simply put. We have Michael Coakley. He was an officer of the 1st Cork Brigade, but he was actually shot out in the Beara Peninsula direction. He was around August or September 1923 as well. He was attending a dance out in forgetting the village, but he was not executed. Sorry, he was there was a bit of a shootout occurred, and he was killed there. So there were still incidences occurring, as that was occurring across the country at this stage.
Another one worth mentioning, but not pictured here, is Mick Radford of Murntown and Wexford. He was killed on the 22nd of June, where he'd escaped from the Wexford jail, and it was just generally assumed that, you know, things had died down. He still wasn't gone home. He was on the run, but he was unarmed, and he was shot twice. He was shot twice in the back, and when he tried to run, and then they spent the whole night searching for him, unable to find him. There was an inquiry in the Dáil, but obviously nothing was ever really done about the whole incident. But his brother as well, Bernie, had been killed in January 10th, 1923, along with another volunteer, Con McCarthy, and they're on the Republican plot in Murntown. But like these kind of incidents still carried on after the Civil War. To be quite honest, the whole concept of putting an end on the Civil War as April or May 1923, I wouldn't say that's accurate at all. I'd say the only real date you could say it ended was the date when the last internees were released.
Yeah, so that would have been mid 1924. Was this late 1924?
I'm not sure the date was 1924 though, but that would be when you would really say the whole thing was ended. Then we have the extrajudicial killings. There's Radford there, actually.
Yeah. We have 131 that we've just counted just from our research that we believe have occurred across the country. We have murdered whilst prisoners, so there were people who were arrested, interrogated, and killed in custody. We have those who were in prisons, particularly in Kilkenny Jail. Kilkenny Jail seems to be a bit of a wild place. We have several deaths occurring in Kilkenny Jail. The one that comes to mind is of James Morrissey. He had attempted to escape, and as they were found escaping, and he had his arms up, he attempted to surrender, and he was just instantly shot. There was no second chance. We have Sean Edwards, Belfast native, but a resident of County of Watford City. He was shot by a sentry in Kilkenny Jail also for refusing to adhere to a sentry's warning about talking to the public out the window. We have John Walsh. He was killed in Kilkenny Jail. He's pictured there under Radford. He was a Watford native also. I believe there was issues going on with the prisoners in Kilkenny Jail, and Walsh was heavily beaten and shot in front of the other prisoners in Kilkenny Jail. We have Dick Birtles there, Vice Brigadier. I believe he was actually suspended from his rank at that stage because Dick Birtles had a battle with alcohol, and he was actually drinking in a bar in County Westmeath, and he was shot by a National Army soldier. I don't know if there was any trial after it. We have Seamus Taylor. His brother Joe was actually killed in the War of Independence, Seamus was from Glencar in County Kerry, and he was arrested and subsequently murdered.
I mean, it's also
So-
worth mentioning as well, you mentioned drink there. Drink is a huge part of all of this, in that a great many of these executions, of these extrajudicial executions, come from National Army soldiers having a few drinks, and then, you know, after the death of a comrade, deciding to take it out on someone. You have the Adamstown killings as well, again, drinks related. There's another case in Donegal, Fermanagh, where Sean Lunny, a volunteer from Malik in Fermanagh, goes to scout in Bundoran, goes into a pub, meets a Free State soldier who knows him. The man offers him a drink. Lunny refuses. Ben is shot and mortally wounded and dies a few months later in November. So drink is a huge part of this whole conflict that doesn't really come into it, isn't really mentioned much.
There was, remember, actually, there was when I was going through the Galway City battalion, there was forgive me, his name's after going out of my head, but he died actually a few months after the Civil War ended. He was involved in that incident in Galway in early at the start of the Civil War, but he was a high-ranking officer in the Galway City area, and he actually died from alcohol abuse, uremia. He died. Oh, I actually can't remember. He died from alcohol poisoning. Not shortly after the Civil War. He hadn't been arrested. He remained active, alive, and through the Civil War. He wasn't arrested. He died in the summer of 1923 from alcohol poisoning. He was only a young fella too. He was only in his 20s, so just quite sad.
And then we have, well, we've gone through the month horrors a little bit, I suppose, but I suppose this is a good number.
We can just, well, see, a lot of them are related to one event. So, like, the majority of the guys photographed on the right hand side, Patrick Buckley, Tim Toomey, Jim Walsh, Michael Connell, John O'Connor, they were actually killed at the massacre of Ballyseedy. Patrick Buckley was a former RIC officer who he ended up becoming an officer of the Irish Republican Police. We have John O'Connor. He was actually a resident in Liverpool, and he'd been involved in arms smuggling throughout the Tan War. And what happened was, he told his wife he was on a job to America. He was going off on a ship as a porter, I believe, on a ship to America. He didn't tell her he was going back to Ireland with an arms shipment. He was arrested in Kerry. He was actually a Kerry native, but he grew up in Inchigeela in County Cork. And he was arrested in Fennet, and he was just pulled out, and he was just, unfortunately, he had to be one of the guys that was brought to the mine of Ballyseedy. We have Lieutenant Stephen Buckley, Jeremiah O'Donoghue, and they were killed at Countess Bridge on the same date. And Micheál Cornane, and we have volunteer Dan Shea down there in the bottom. They were killed at the Bahaz massacre near Cahir-Savine. And what was most horrific about that, this occurred about a week after Ballyseedy and Countess Bridge. And so the country had known about the story. Of course, the official narrative was prisoners killed basically by their own comrades' mines. They were out clearing up the road barricades, and they just had to be killed by their own comrades' mines. But of course, we all know the story today, that because thanks to the fact that two men survived, one of each, we have Stephen Fuller survived the Ballyseedy massacre, and we have Ty Coffey surviving the Countess Bridge massacre, and they were both able to tell the story after the Civil War, that what exactly happened. It was horrific. So what happened at the massacre near Cahir-Savine was they were shot. Each prisoner was shot in the knees before the mine exploded, so no prisoner was going to escape this one. So 5 men were killed there. On the left-hand side, we have a few examples here of some of the extrajudicial murders that occurred in Kerry. We have Brigadier Engineer Dan Clifford. And when the Free State soldiers were rounding up, there were a reconnaissance and rounding up anti-treatyites in the Kerry 3rd Brigade area, West Kerry, near Cahir-Savine, Waterville and Ballinskellig's direction. We have Dan Clifford being found near, I think he was hiding in a cow shed, I believe, and he was unarmed and he was shot We have Captain John Kevins from Beaufort in County Kerry. He was shot and mortally wounded, and as the soldiers were bringing him towards Killarney, they finished him off. Basically, his remains were found on the road the following day. Jackie Fleming from Tralee, he was shot in the head. Very, very contentious story there. We have Frank Grady, who was approached by a Free State officer near Glenbeigh, County Kerry, and in front of people going to mass. Like as mentioned before, there was a lot of carelessness about who they shot people in front of. That the Free State soldiers, they stopped Frank Grady, and Frank openly admitted who he was, and as he was putting his hand to shake the Free State officer's hand, he was shot in the head, point blank. Many thanks to his relative in California who sent me the picture of Frank Grady. Local historians in Kerry, in that part of Kerry, Glenbeigh, never seen his photograph before. So it just shows that what's out there. We have that photograph coming from California. We've Ty Keating from Ballinskelligs. He was shot by Free State soldiers as he was making his way home from a wedding. He was found. I actually passed his cross, the memorial cross, to the site of his killing only last week. We have volunteer Dan Murphy from Knocknagoshel, the blacksmith volunteer. He was blamed for he was blamed by the Free State soldiers as the person who created the mine, the Knocknagoshel mine, which killed 5 National Army soldiers. So he was brought out and he was shot in the field close to his home during a raid. So if you want to move on, Shane.
Yep. Right.
So here we have 77, 79, 81 or 83 of Mindset Ireland. So this is very interesting. Traditional republicanism always has 77. We want to see a lot of that now in the next few months. 77 of who died in the Civil War, and of course the famous the ballad as it goes, 77 of Mindset Ireland. So the legality of the executions, Shane touched off it briefly before with that resolution in September, and I'll just have a few notes here. I just want to, like, the war had developed heavily in August and September 1922. It was costing much to the state. Michael Collins himself had even written about the idea of special punishments being meted out to those found with arms. Of course, he was heavily against the shooting of unarmed men, so his successors were guilty there. Free State were receiving higher casualties than Republicans, and General Emmett Dalton was based in Cork. He'd actually encouraged the idea to Richard Mulcahy, who was then the new commander-in-chief, to shoot armed men on sight. This, of course, was refused by Mulcahy. The new emergency powers wasn't all illegal. It had no standing and was simply a resolution. It needed the king's consent, or the king's representative. So of course that would have been very contentious. Whilst arguing the resolution in the Dáil, Mulcahy reminded the House about the destruction and the costs that was being caused across the country, and he supported it and openly stated that life must be taken if necessary, and it is the responsibility of the government to say that it must be taken. The Labour Party leader, Tom Johnson, he argued for open justice in criminal courts, and this resolution eventually passed 47 to 15 votes. The Free State the provisional government then issued proclamations nationwide, basically offering an amnesty to those who handed in their weapons. And of course, the bishop's pastoral letter had a major, profound effect as well on those who would have been diehard Roman Catholics as well. So these all had a major. These all played a major part in the destruction of the Republican movement in the Civil War, eventually, as we've seen with all the executions. But as you can see with the image there, we have Mellows, O'Connor, McKelvey, and Dick Barrett, and it's one of those, we all know it was a retributory killing. It was completely illegal, immoral. It was simply done by orders of the cabinet. as retribution for the killing of Sean Hales and the wounding of Padraig O'Malley. So I just have this, I'm going to read an excerpt here from the Irish Civil War Law, Execution and Atrocity, recently published by Sean Emmerich. So I'm just going to quickly read this out and you'll get an idea. So the news was brought to Leinster House within minutes, and Cosgrave rose. I have just been informed that Deputy Sean Hales has been shot dead and that Deputy O'Malley has been wounded. Cosgrave offered no hint of any government response, but the Executive Council of the Free State Government met that evening. Ernest Bligh, arriving late and in a hurry, heard the names of 4 prisoners read out: Mellows, Barrett, O'Connor and McKelvey. They had all been members of the Four Courts Executive during the siege earlier that summer, and they were to be executed as a reprisal for the killing of Hales. The initiative on this step had been taken by General Mulcahy, although it is inconceivable that he did so without the prompting or the backing of the Army Council. Mulcahy sought the agreement of the Executive Council and did so perhaps because it was an extreme measure and in the hope that the sharing of responsibility might head off later retribution. None of the ministers dissented except O'Higgins, who asked, "Is there no alternative?" It was the only occasion in the war when O'Higgins' desire for extreme action was outmatched by the army. Mellows was well known to all, and 6 months previously, one of the prisoners, Rory O'Connor, had been best man for Kevin O'Higgins. But no cabinet minister raised the question of old friendships. O'Higgins relented after short discussion: take them out and shoot them. So that shows from cabinet level that the killing of 4 prisoners was to be allowed. As Shane mentioned earlier, we have Dunn and O'Sullivan, the 2 IRA, the London-based IRA men. They were executed in August for the killing of Henry Wilson. They're actually forgotten. We always mention 77 were killed during the Civil War. If we wanted to follow the traditional Republican view of 77, we actually should say 79 there. We could also argue 79 because if Shane I just want to briefly touch off legacy. I'll remind you of that now in a second. But if Shane moves on to the next slide, please.
Yep.
So this could be 79. If anybody has this book, Burke and Greeley, Mullingar's Two Forgotten Martyrs by Peter A. Rogers, is quite a very good book. It's a short book, but it's a very, very detailed book. And
Peter did fantastic work for Westmeath as well, we have to say.
That's right, yeah. We have the brigade sanctioned bank robbery. They were found in possession of £385, and they were executed in Mullingar jail on the 13th. That should be on 13th of March 1923. Why they weren't counted on the Republican list, we don't actually know. They committed the same crimes as the Burr Tree, the men who were killed in Burcastle in January 1923. So I don't know why they were never officially listed on the Republican list of executed. We can actually see the rank of Leo Burke was actually quite high. He was Adjutant General of the Tyrone 3rd Brigade. We have Michael Greeley of F Company 2nd Battalion, the 3rd Meade Brigade, and we believe he was a 1916 veteran as well. He was actually from County Roscommon. Yeah, you can actually see on the memorial there, he's actually a native of Scrumog in County Roscommon. So they're not listed on the traditional list. So we could also that's 79. That's not counting, of course, Dunn and O'Sullivan. So 79. We can also say it's 81. So Shane, if you don't mind going on to the next slide, please.
Yeah.
The Ardraghan too. So Joseph O'Rourke and Michael Murphy, they were completely forgotten about because they were executed on the 30th of May after the ceasefire. They were involved in a similar robbery. They robbed the Munster and Leinster Bank in Athenry and they stole £700, and there was no one shot. The guns weren't discharged, and they were picked up. There was no legal representation at the military committee trial, but I believe, Shane, you mentioned earlier that they actually stated that they were not associated with the IRA. Now, they probably feared that because of all the executions that occurred, they probably feared being associated with the IRA in name. So they were executed in Tuam on the 30th of May 1923, and they were the official last state executions of the Civil War period, not recognised by the Republican tradition. And if you look here on the nominal roll for the Ardraghan Company, Ardraghan was the Southwest Brigade, the Galway Southwest Brigade, or the Gort Brigade. You have their names here. So you can see in the first box at the top, Joseph Rourke, deceased, he was actually one of the dispatch riders, and then down at the bottom we have Michael Murphy of Crana, Gort. So he was down as deceased also. So they were members of the IRA. Maybe in the last few months before the Civil War had ended, they had completely broken links with the IRA. I'm not 100% sure there, but it is still worth noting that they had links to the Republican movement at the time, and of course they're definitely not listed or recognised by the Republican family. So was it 77? Well, we know 77. Was it 79? Was it 81? Could we say 83 in total, including Dunn and O'Sullivan in London? That's an interesting question. So if you want to carry on, Shane.
Yeah.
So here today, I've never actually seen anything like this done before. You see it always done for 1916, where you have the leaders of 1916. You see it done for those who died in 1920 and 21, but you never see them fully listed for the Civil War. And this is so from our project. They're quite badly laid out. I apologize for that. Quite scatty looking, but this is every photograph we could find of those who were executed in chronological order. So we have the guys that start: Fisher, Cassidy, Gaffney, Twig, Childers, Spooner, Murphy. You know, all the way through right up towards Quinn and the guys from County Clare at the end. So it's quite horrific when you see it like that. The amount of, I mean, this we're still missing about 15 photographs.
And we forgot to put in Dunn and O'Sullivan.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So I fell for that. You see, I completely forgot about Dunn and O'Sullivan. So there you go. We're so used to 77. Yeah. So if by chance anyone viewing tonight or who watches this video on YouTube, if you happen to have a photograph of one of those who were executed, please get in contact. I know we're missing some from County Louth. We have the 2 Waterford ones. We have the 3 Portlaoise men. We have the 3 Wexford. We have the 1 Cork.
Offaly we don't have any of.
Sorry.
What about the Offaly ones?
No, we don't have 3 from Burr. No. You can see the Free State. Sorry, those who absconded from the National Army. The Portobello Barracks executions. They're very, very poor photographs. We've had to rely on those photographs from Death or Dishonour, the book by Martin Bob O'Dwyer. The photographs are very poor, unfortunately, and I believe he got them from an old issue of Unpublished, or was it Era? The newspapers are out in the 1920s, which were the fantastic papers for remembering the dead. But photographs weren't great. We have, I think there's a couple from Tipperary we don't have, and there's a few of the Kerry ones. We mentioned Hathaway and Ned Green. We don't have their photographs, and
I mean, another thing worth touching on as well is the ones in National Army uniform. The amount of them that we have, that we only have National Army uniformed pictures of them because of their brief period of membership of that around February to April or so, 1922, was huge as well. And the same with British Army as well, because this was an occasion you dress up for, get a good photo of. That's a very common theme here, and you're less likely to actually see them in more traditional IRA looking gear than you would that.
Should we carry on, Shane?
Yeah, so that's a fine.
Have we got
more
missed
slides?
I think we had another slide. We did. We had a break.
Yeah, we won summon them all up, didn't we?
We did.
Oops. Well, there we are. There's county analysis. Got mixed up at some point.
Yeah. So here we have county analysis. We couldn't put in all the counties, of course. So we put in the ones that had the most Civil War action in. As you can see, Kerry's extra-judicial is through the roof. Killed in action, Dublin, Tipperary and Cork, followed by Limerick. They saw the highest amount of killed in action casualties. Prison deaths are quite frequent amongst most of those counties, actually. So yeah, that's quite accurate from our project. And I'm sure other historians have their own their own analysis, their own statistics, which can be compared to. So,
All right, now the final slide, go backwards.
sorry everybody.
There we go.
Now, so we have, as I mentioned earlier, we have 1,780 casualties of deaths recorded from Easter 1916 to December 1924 of Irish Republicans. Many died in action, many died from hunger strike and imprisonment and disease, Spanish influenza. We've recorded them all, and we have 870 photographs. So if you have a relative who died from the Spanish flu or from a heart attack in 1920, or who you know that was part of the Irish Volunteers or Irish Republican Army, the Citizen Army, the Cumann na mBan, Fianna Éireann, even just remember Sinn Féin at the time, just get in contact, please, because we are trying to build a definitive book here. We're also including Republicans who died in Scotland, America, and Australia, who would have been active at that time in that period. So it's not just the family within Ireland. We're trying to include the Republican family abroad as well. They also suffered imprisonment and harsh life also. So please, if you have a photograph or a memorial card of a relative or a local who died during this period, please contact us. We don't presume that we might already have this photograph. You might have a better quality photograph than what we already have. So we'd really appreciate that if you get in contact with us there. So we can go to questions now.
All right.
Okay. I think thank you very much to Colum and Shane for that fascinating talk. What you've done there is absolutely brilliant, and it's so important for our own history that we have these people actually documented and their lives in, I suppose, recorded for everybody, that it's there for everybody, you know. What is your time frame for publishing all this, Colum and Shane?
Well, we've been we can openly state it now. We've actually got the full support of the National Graves Association, which is great. They actually verified here 2 weeks ago that they were fully behind us. Now that's great because they have a large following and large network, so they'll be fantastic for advertisement. Publishing wise, we've actually took a dent there. We had a publisher, but unfortunately he's not well at the moment and he's too much on, so we are currently looking for a publisher, but we are creating we have a draft at present where it looks quite complete, it's quite illustrated, and we're including eyewitness accounts. We're trying to give the reader a feel of the time, judging from what they read of the eyewitness accounts in between the deaths. So you're not just reading death after death after death. We're trying to give the readers a feel. So, like, for example, now from 1916 right up to the end of 1918, we have 170 pages. And it's not all just eyewitness accounts. We've actually got quite a lot of deaths there because of the Spanish flu, and there was a couple of casualties who died from wounds received in 1916, and it'll get fairly intense as we go into 1920 and 21, particularly during the truce period. Then we have the majority of the deaths during the truce occurred in the north, and where the actions didn't really cease, and then the Civil War, of course. So we reckon we won't be able to get this all into one book. It's going to have to be multiple books. So
Get on. I suppose it's very important that this really is done properly, you know.
Yeah, like if we can't get a publisher, like we are generally unknown in the history world, so like we don't expect publishers to come to us straight away. We're going to have to approach them, and if not, then we're going to have to just go self-publishing route. So
your first book was brilliant, right here.
Oh, it was, wasn't it?
Right. So you've got a wide lot of mask cards there with the photographs, and that's brilliant. You know, is there any photographs out there that you know exist, but you haven't quite got your hands on it? And
Yeah.
it's sort of one that's got away, kind of thing.
Yeah, there's a few. There's a guy who died in 1920 by the name of McNestry. He was involved in 1916, and he died. He was a Cork native, I believe. I know there's a photograph of him out there. I can't find him. Do you know what's been a great resource for us is actually been Ancestry. Now, of course, we get permission off the families, but just on Ancestry, doing a random search of a name, the year they died, and you'll actually find the family trees. And 1 out of 10 might have a photograph of the person. Now, I actually got a photograph of Frank Jackson from Ancestry, and I got permission off their family to use it. Did no problem using it. That was lovely to see, because we have very few pictures of those who died in the Battle of Dublin. I'm actually going to share his photograph online now after this talk on the group we have, and we have several others. Now the one I particularly loved getting was Arthur Wicks, also known as Neil. That was his alias, because he was a conscientious objector. He was an Englishman from Norwich, and he was a devout socialist. And he came to Ireland. He worked in the Shelbourne Hotel as a porter, and he wasn't even associated with the Irish Volunteers or the Citizen Army. He just landed up at Liberty Hall on Easter Monday morning, and he joined. And he was remembered for his Jewish-looking features, even though he wasn't. He was a Church of England English boy, purebred English boy. His photograph
had a big nose.
No, you can't be saying things like that nowadays.
You know.
We actually got several photographs of Arthur, and it was great. It was fantastic to get off his grandniece, and it was just great to get the family side of him. He wasn't a popular figure in their family history afterwards, as you can imagine. I can't share his photograph for the family's wishes. Not the photograph cannot be shared online, or because they don't want it used or abused by people. That was their wishes, and they've allowed it for publication, and that's been great, because a lot of the books we see of those who died in 1916, he's always sort of a forgotten casualty. He's always just mentioned as the guy who died because an ammunition pouch exploded and the bullets. He was mortally wounded as a result, and that was fantastic to get them. You know, but there's a lot more out there, and I just know there's a lot of grainy looking photographs, like we have here of the guys I mentioned up there in the second row. Very grainy, dark images. We want to find the originals, and if we can, it'd be fantastic. If we can't, that's so be it. And there's a lot of guys we know there is no family, there is no photograph. We've been in contact with the families, and there's been nothing at all. Like I mentioned earlier, the newspapers era, 1924-25 were fantastic for going into detail about those who died in the Civil War, particularly. They wanted to really highlight the savagery of the Free State during the Civil War, to sort of to delegitimize them, if you want to say, as successors of the Black and Tans, or to legitimize them as successors of the Black and Tans, I should say. And yeah, I love finding more and more photographs. There's weeks have gone by, no photographs, and then one day alone you could get 3 or 4 sent to me, and that's just been fantastic. Like the other day now, Dr. Tomas McNamara, a fantastic fella, he sent me a picture of Joseph Considine, and on the same day, Tomas McCormick down in Cork sent me a picture of Kieran McMenemy, an Antrim man who was in the Dublin Brigade, and he died in April 1924 as a result of incarceration.
Armagh, wasn't
he? Armagh, yeah.
Lockall Armagh action, that was it.
That's it. So he was fantastic there.
He was a particularly hard one to find anything about, because he's mentioned in the 1932 edition of the Last Post, but all
his
read his name, and that was it. And we were looking and looking, and eventually Colum found him in the nominal rolls, and there was a thread we followed, and eventually we got him.
Yeah, he's Kieran. The name Kieran, it was not, even Kieran was not a common name back then. So like I was typing in anything that we associate with the name Kieran onto the civil record searches, could not find him. McMenemy, McMenamum, McManus, so searching all, I could not find him, and lo and behold, them one day I was going through the nominal rolls for the Dublin Brigade, as well as on Fublocht, I think it was, I think it was the Sinn Féin newspaper or Éire newspaper, and it mentioned, it actually had an obituary to him. So that was great. Those newspapers have been helpful.
Yeah. So someone I picked up on the start, and Mike McGregor's picked up on it as well. At the start, you said about the numbers were evenly matched. but the use of artillery against the forecourts altered the balance. How closely involved were the British who supplied that artillery and also in monitoring the Civil War and supporting the Free State further?
Well, they were closely involved in the. It's kind of there is an argument made about whether or not they were involved in firing the guns themselves. There's one eyewitness account saying that he actually was firing them, but he believed he was firing against the Black and Tans. There was obviously, the simple fact that the Free State were being given all of their military equipment by the British. There was a few interesting incidents where the Royal Navy actually fired on anti-treaty positions in near Kilkenny and that the like. It was closely linked, but the Free State generally did most of the dirty work itself. There wasn't a huge British presence, and then you have to remember as well, relations weren't always perfect. The British were still an occupation of Petago until I think it was the end of 1924 even. But there is a small problem here that me and Colum have. We've got a bit of tunnel vision, I believe, and that we've been looking at so many dead Republicans for so long. Dead Republicans, a Republican died here, a Republican died there, that we're victims of ambushology, one could say. We've gotten so wrapped up in deaths, we sometimes forget the broader picture, which is something Colum's trying to fix at the moment, in that he's including all these extra snippets about the broader picture, because otherwise it is just a list of deaths, and that's no good to anyone.
Dead on. Thank you very much. Tell me this here. What about reprisals against families? Did that often happen?
There were anti-treaty reprisals against Free State families, such as the incident which saw whose baby son was killed. Do you remember, Colum?
Or McGarry.
McGarry, yes, but
His young son. He was,
yes.
he was
But
only
I mean, like, anti-treaty families would have suffered great bit of, brutalization in general, constant raids, that sort of thing. But it was just, par for the course, really. It was the same thing that had happened in the War of Independence.
Right, dead on. Was the decision to put prisoners on trial and execute them left to the discretion of local Free State commanders?
In general, yes, it was up to the army command to do executions. There are some areas where, like as far as I can remember, there's none in Leitrim, there's none in Cavan. There's obviously in Donegal, you have the March cases, which, but like there's a lot of areas where there simply is no executions. And that was because the local commander simply wasn't willing to do it. And like Colin mentioned earlier, in Kerry, initially, the men in charge weren't willing to go through with it.
Okay, there's a comment here about Colin's squad and how it was so ruthless. Do you think that was because of the War of Independence and what they went through?
Definitely PTSD was a factor. Charlie Dalton would be one example of that, and I believe he ended up in a mental hospital in the end. But like, these were people who'd went through several years of extreme violence, shooting people in the face. Then they're placed in command of an army instead of doing it themselves. It's kind of what you would expect to happen in that kind of situation. In a way, it doesn't. I'm not justifying it, obviously, but it is what would happen, I guess. Like I think, as far as I can remember, Daly himself actually shot a prisoner and by his own hand.
Okay.
He was involved in the Clondalkin murders, wasn't he? He killed the teenagers.
No, it's not Charlie Dalton I'm thinking of. It's his younger brother was the one who ended up in a mental hospital. But yeah, Charlie Dalton is alleged to have been involved in murders himself. And
you're not confusing with Emmett Dalton. Emmett Dalton, they believe, was involved in the murder of Ty Kennefic.
No, you're right. Yes, I'm getting them all. Too many Daltons around.
Charlie was involved, or believed to be involved, in the Clondalkin murders of October, where the 3 teenagers were postering. And I believe Edward Hughes, I think he was the only one who was a volunteer. The other 2 were Fianna Aaron. They were brutally shot in Clondalkin.
That's
Okay.
it. Yeah, you're right.
There's a wide lot of positive comments here, Colum and Shane. There's 40 minutes like better to read out. There's 40 minutes. But here, is your total figure for the IRA Civil War death toll from your research on both sides?
Oh, Jesus, we actually didn't do that, did we, Shane?
You know, that would be kind of something you think we would have done. We would have just counted them
You
up.
see,
But
For this, out of the 1780 we mentioned,
Yeah.
including people who died of natural causes, heart attacks, so forth, whilst being members of the organisations. For this presentation, we focused on Civil War related deaths, as in people who died as a result of the conflict, and we didn't add in about John Murphy, who died while out feeding the chickens of a heart attack. You know, we didn't put in those guys, we left them out, but for the book we will be entering them in somewhere. So we didn't do a concise figure count of those who died as a result of the we can actually probably count it off that if someone's very good at quick addition there. But I'm just actually, when you just mentioned there about families and so forth, I just actually remember this section here. This is also again from the Irish Civil War, Law, Execution and Atrocities by Sean Enright. It's towards the end and it's quite poignant. So I'm just quickly read it out. Well, Shane does a count there of all the numbers. We have, at this juncture, the families of the prisoners killed in the Kerry landmine massacres applied for compensation from a government committee set up to help those affected by death or injury during the Civil War. They had the support of the Commission of the Civic Guards and local officers. The dead men had been breadwinners and now their families were living in poverty. An attempt to secure compensation was blocked by the Executive Council on the grounds that there had been a full army investigation under Major General O'Daly, and the system was not designed to pay out funds to the families of those who had been in default. Somehow default was equated with being a prisoner. General O'Daly and his officers would retire on government pensions, but the families of the dead were left to fend for themselves. It is in the nature of big institutions to obfuscate and deny culpability in times of crisis, and that reflex has been much in evidence in Irish life. The Ryan Commission and the Magdalen Laundries affair have shown that only too clearly. The inquiry into the Kerry landmines massacre was the first such cover-up in the new state, and the denial of compensation to the widows and children of the dead was just another turn of the screw. So that's the birth of the Irish nation.
I suppose one last thing, John Hegarty has sent in a really good comment here, you know. He says that his anti-treaty grandfather gave a Free State officer his job back after the Civil War, even though they shot each other during the war. Up in North especially, it's all about reconciliation. Have you come across any other stories of reconciliation during your research?
Not during the research, but we just know of several. Like we know De Valera and Cosgrave despised each other, even in politics, for years after. And I think it was the day when John F. Kennedy gave his speech in the Dáil in 1963 that they actually, I believe, they passed a few words to each other for the first time since 1922. That wasn't a political debate, and you hear of instances like this across the whole country. But of course, you have to remember that tens of thousands of Republicans could not get their jobs after the Civil War. A lot of them couldn't get their jobs back. They were sort of mooted out of society in a sense. They were encouraged to leave, and tens of thousands emigrated to America, Australia, Britain, and Canada.
Yeah.
And
where they're also very hard to trace when they die.
Yeah, very, very hard. And
I have the rough count. 426 approximately.
What's that? 426 we have, is it, Shane?
Approximately. There's hard to be sure with some of these, you know, the way the lines go, but that's give or take what it is.
Okay.
Well, here, it's a Friday night, and I think we'll wrap it up there. We've taken up enough of your time, Colum and Shane. Fascinating lecture, and the work you're doing is absolutely vital for the history of this island we're on, and the remembrance of these people is, I think it's second to none. The work you're doing there, you know, it's absolutely brilliant. The comments in your chat box is all very positive. Many thanks from everybody here and in the chat box, and to everybody tuned in. Thank you very much for coming tonight. It was very good to see you all again. And
Yeah, thanks-
Colum, do you want
thanks,
to just close it there?
Yeah, Stephen actually I'll just do it myself. Actually, I was just going to copy and paste I just copy all the questions because I want to see if anybody has information here for me.
Yep.
Just 1 second. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and sorry about the glitches earlier. And we hope you enjoyed it. But it'll be uploaded on YouTube now shortly, and we hope you've had a good night. Thanks everyone.
Okay.
All right.